At a state banquet in London, in the autumn of 2024, Catherine, Princess of Wales, walked into the room wearing a tiara that had survived a revolution. Not metaphorically. Literally. The Vladimir Tiara, 15 interlocking diamond circles, suspended pearl drops trembling with each step, had been smuggled out of a sealed palace vault in Petrograd in 1917, wrapped in newspaper inside 2 ordinary Gladstone bags, carried past revolutionary checkpoints on a train heading for Sweden. Its original owner, Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna, matriarch of the Vladimir branch of the Romanovs, had fled south with the clothes on her back as the city fell, leaving the vault behind. She died in French exile 3 years later, never recovering what she had lost. The story of how the tiara left Russia is worth pausing on. Boris, the Grand Duchess's son, and the British art dealer Bertie Stopford, reportedly operating with at least the quiet awareness of British diplomatic circles, entered the sealed Vladimir Palace disguised as workmen. A sympathetic caretaker helped them locate the hidden safe. They packed over 200 jewels into 2 Gladstone bags of the kind that attracted no attention on a civilian train. They crossed into Sweden. The stones arrived in London wrapped in newspaper. The operation had taken hours. The world it escaped from had already ceased to exist. The tiara eventually passed to a British queen who spent 4 decades quietly rebuilding everything she touched, altering it, restoring it, adding 15 emerald drops that had themselves survived their own set of scandals, and making it more layered, more durable, more useful than it had ever been before. More than a century after the revolution that nearly destroyed it, it caught the light in a London dining room as though history were a minor inconvenience. That is, in the end, the most precise image of Queen Mary of Teck that history has left us, not a formal portrait, not a diary entry, not a policy, but an object in motion, an object that endured. If you are drawn to the stories behind the objects that dynasties leave behind, the weight beneath the glitter, the grief encoded in platinum, welcome. Hit like if these stories stay with you, and subscribe. There is always more beneath the surface. Begin then, not with a queen, but with a pair of emeralds. In 1808, Princess Augusta, Duchess of Cambridge, won a set of extraordinary pear-shaped emeralds in a lottery. This was not unusual for the period. Jewels of consequence changed hands in aristocratic circles, through auctions, wagers, gifts, and inheritances, with a frequency that would alarm modern sensibilities. Augusta kept them, set them, wore them. When she died, they passed as such things did through the generations of the Cambridge family. By the time they reached the late Victorian era, they had absorbed nearly a century of family history: births, marriages, financial reversals, the slow dissolution of minor German principalities into the broader architecture of the British royal family. They were beautiful stones, but they were also by then deeply inconvenient. Queen Mary of Teck, born in 1867, raised in grace and favor apartments on the edge of Kensington Palace, with a father who could charm anyone and pay almost no one, had watched wealth and scarcity operate in close proximity her entire childhood. The family relocated to Florence for 2 years in the 1880s, not for culture or climate, but to outrun mounting debts. What her mother, the expansive Princess Mary Adelaide, processed through warmth and performance, Mary processed through observation. She became very early a woman who understood the difference between what things were worth and what they cost. Not the same calculation at all. Her first engagement to Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence, ended when he died suddenly in 1892. Within months, she was engaged to his younger brother George. The practicality of that transition, its bluntness, its efficiency, has been remarked upon, often usually with mild discomfort. What tends to be overlooked is what it told her about the nature of royal life, that the institution was larger than any individual within it, that sentiment was a current running beneath the official record rather than through it, and that the official record was what persisted. She married George in 1893. She intended to be useful. She intended to endure. The emeralds arrived at the first true crisis of her marriage, wearing the face of family scandal. Her brother Prince Francis of Teck, the charming, gambling, financially ruinous Frank, died unexpectedly of pneumonia at Balmoral in October 1910. His will, written in 1902, directed the entire Cambridge Emerald collection, along with pearls and other family pieces, to his long-standing married mistress Ellen Constance, Needham Countess of Kilmorey. The document was written with the particular recklessness of a man who had never once concerned himself with consequences, and it read like one. There was even language in it that addressed Mary directly, unfavorably. Frank in death, as in life, had managed to create a problem for everyone around him. What followed tells you something essential about how Mary operated not as a schemer, but as a surgeon. She did not issue public statements. She went to the courts, petitioned to have the will sealed for over a century, then negotiated privately with Nellie Needham, eventually settling at £10 more than £600 in today's terms to acquire the emeralds outright. The transaction completed in July 1911. Within weeks, those same stones were crowning the Delhi Durbar Tiara on her imperial brow. The Delhi Durbar of 1911 was the formal coronation of George V and Mary as Emperor and Empress of India, staged on the plains outside Delhi in a purpose-built city of tents and pavilions, designed to make every assembled dignitary feel the full considered gravity of the British imperial project. 100,000 subjects in attendance, Maharajas arriving on decorated elephants, a sky so white with heat it seemed to vibrate. Mary had commissioned Garrard to build a diadem that could command this scale of spectacle, 675 diamonds in a sweeping circlet of platinum and gold overlapping festoons, designed to encircle the head like a structure rather than an ornament, the Cambridge emeralds blazing from the top like 10 points of deep green fire. George V, who was not by nature a demonstrative man, described the Delhi Durbar in his diary as the most wonderful and thrilling sight I ever saw, for a man of his emotional restraint, roughly the equivalent of rapture. The ceremony lasted hours under the Indian sun, each element choreographed to communicate a single idea that the British crown sat at the apex of a civilizational order, both eternal and self-evidently correct. Mary moved through it with the composure of someone who had spent an entire life preparing for this specific role. The stones had passed through a lottery, a death, a scandal, a sealed court document, a private financial settlement, and Garrard's workshops arriving in India, wearing the face of seamless imperial authority. That gap between what the stones had been through and what they appeared to be was not concealment so much as transformation. Mary had a particular genius for converting the damaged and the complicated into something functional and even magnificent. It was perhaps the central skill of her life. The vault she kept at Marlborough House was in this sense a working studio as much as a storage space. Mary did not collect passively. She collected the way an architect collects materials, with an eye always on what could be built, rebuilt, repurposed, adapted to a changing structure. She removed the 14 pearls from the girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara and repositioned them atop her Cambridge lover's knot replica, rehonoring a design that had belonged to her grandmother and aunt. She later stripped those same pearls back again, refining the silhouette into something leaner. She dismantled 2 wedding gifts and recombined their elements into the modular honeysuckle tiara, its diamond center motif interchangeable Cullinan V, a sapphire cluster, or a dedicated honeysuckle diamond made specially for her daughter-in-law Alice, Duchess of Gloucester. She was always in some sense mid-revision. The Vladimir Tiara arrived at Garrard's in 1920 in a state of considerable damage. Its Romanov pearls depleted its settings, distressed the whole piece, bearing the visual grammar of catastrophe. Mary saw through the damage to the architecture. She restored it then, transformed it, adding the 15 Cambridge emerald drops, the Delhi stones now repurposed again, so that it could be worn in 2 entirely different registers, with the original Romanov pearls for formal grandeur, or with the emeralds for something richer and more complex. Swapping between them, was an operation of extraordinary care, nearly an hour bare-handed, each drop in its own numbered pouch. Precision born of something that in another person might have been called devotion. There was also underpinning all of it an economic intelligence that tends to be underreported. Mary understood the intrinsic value of stones, independent of their settings. She could look at a damaged piece and calculate almost intuitively what the components were worth and what they could become. She bought from Romanov exiles at prices that reflected the urgency of their situations. She acquired pieces through estate sales of aristocrats whose fortunes had not survived the war. She was not exploitative in any simple sense. She preserved things that might otherwise have been broken up entirely, but she was also a buyer operating with far more resources and far more patience than her sellers typically possessed. Aristocratic hosts learned to quietly relocate prized objects before her visits. London dealers learned patience. What is clear beneath the biographical debate about her motivations is the pattern she was building something, not just a collection, an argument made in platinum and stone against the losses she could feel accumulating. Because the losses from the beginning had been extraordinary in their frequency. Prince John was the youngest of her 6 children, born in 1905, with a temperament and neurology that the Edwardian court had no framework for understanding. He experienced severe epileptic episodes and what we now recognize as autism, a gentle and genuinely affectionate child devoted to his nanny Lala Bill, happy within the small and careful world that had been constructed for him at Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate. From 1916 he lived there separately from the family, not because he was unloved, but because the court's understanding of royal dignity could not accommodate visible difference. His care was attentive. His isolation was total. He slipped away in January 1919, aged 13. Mary drove through the dark to Sandringham and sat with him. In her diary, she wrote, "A great shock, though, for the poor little boy's restless soul. Death came as a great relief, missed the dear child very much indeed." To modernize, the entry reads as cold. Perhaps it was. Or perhaps it is the record of a woman who had never been given any language for grief, except the language of endurance, who had learned from childhood forward that the only legitimate response to devastation was to continue. What she actually felt in that room cannot be recovered from the words she chose to write. That distance between diary and truth is its own kind of loss. On 25 August 1942, a short Sunderland flying boat carrying Prince George, Duke of Kent, her 4th son, the one who had navigated the hardest private roads and seemed by then to have found more stable ground, struck Eagle's Rock in the Scottish Highlands at full throttle. 14 men were gone within moments. George was 39, the first British royal to fall on active service in more than 4 centuries. Prince George had been by all accounts the most personally charismatic of the brothers, socially brilliant, aesthetically adventurous, a man who moved easily through artistic and aristocratic circles that his more conventional siblings found less accessible. He had navigated significant private difficulties in his 20s, and Marina had been, by most accounts, genuinely steadying. They had 3 children. There was by 1942 reason to believe the difficult years were behind them. That particular cruelty being taken at the moment things were improving is one the official record does not address. An inquiry convened and concluded within days. The single survivor was bound by the Official Secrets Act. The site was cleared. The official record of the flight's purpose and circumstances remains thin in ways that have generated speculation for 8 decades. Whether that thinness reflects deliberate discretion or the wartime habit of minimal documentation, it produced the same effect: a door that opened briefly onto the event, then closed. Marina was overwhelmed at the coffin grief, bypassing the considerable composure her royal training had built into her. Mary stood rigid at the funeral, her face arranged in the expression she had been maintaining for 50 years, the expression that gave nothing away, and took her surviving son's arm. She was 65. She had lost a youngest child, a husband, and now a fourth son. George V. I would follow in 1952. Before him there had been Edward V. I.E.E., the eldest, the heir, the child around whom the entire dynastic future had been organized, chose Wallis Simpson over a throne. For the world it registered as romance. For Mary it registered as the experience of watching decades of investment, not money, but accumulated preparation instruction, the specific effort of raising a king dissolve in a matter of days, for reasons she found insufficient. She never fully forgave him. Their correspondence continued. The warmth did not recover. She had buried children. She had endured wars. She had never before this been simply left by someone still living. She returned as always to the vault, lifted a piece, turned it in her hands, decided what it could yet become. The Cambridge sapphire parure told its own version of this story across the following generation. A magnificent 19th century sweet tiara necklace, stomacher bracelets, brooches each stone. A deep oceanic blue had passed to Mary, then moved on as a wedding gift to Princess Marina. In 1934, a considered act of generosity from a woman who calculated every gesture. Marina wore the suite with the elegance that exists only at the intersection of extraordinary beauty and genuine melancholy. Cecil Beaton photographed her in the full parure, the dark stones against her dark hair, her expression carrying something the camera caught and never quite named. After Marina's passing in 1968, the pieces moved to her son, Edward, Duke of Kent. Financial pressures accumulated. The sapphire tiara appeared at Sotheby's in 1993, then at Christie's in 1998. Other elements were separated, modified, dispersed. What had once been a sovereign gesture of inclusion became 2 generations on liquidity. The vault's logic, acquire, preserve, transmute had no guarantee of continuation past the hands that understood it. Mary passed in March 1953 at Marlborough House, aged 85 weeks before her granddaughter Elizabeth's coronation, an event she had invested the final years of her life in anticipating, as if the continuity it represented were itself a form of answer to everything that had preceded it. She did not live to see it. She left behind nearly 24 tiaras, many bearing the marks of her own intervention, pearls, repositioned, drop-swapped motifs, redesigned for wearers not yet born. The Lincoln brooch bandeau and the sapphire sunray bandeau, both in their geometric Art Deco precision, almost aggressively contemporary, vanished into the royal safes for half a century. Then briefly emerged the bandeau worn by Meghan Markle at her 2018 wedding, its severe lines suddenly legible again after 65 years of silence. The lover's knot passed from Elizabeth to Diana, who found the swinging pearl drops a genuine physical burden, the weight cumulative across a long evening, the tiara making its presence known at every turn of the head. Then it moved to Catherine, who wears it with evident ease, the piece finally finding a wearer whose bearing absorbs rather than resists its demands. The Vladimir moves still, its drops swapped and reswapped, its double identity Romanov pearls, Cambridge emeralds, playing out at state events in rooms Mary could not have imagined entering. In 2025, the Delhi Durbar Tiara returned to its diamond-only state. The emerald toppers, long since migrated elsewhere, left the vault, not for a ceremony, but for a glass case at the King's Gallery. Visitors photograph it through tempered glass. A tiara under museum conditions is a different object than a tiara in motion. The piece that Mary commissioned to project imperial authority across a subcontinent now stands still observed, rather than worn, having outlasted the empire that built it, the woman who imagined it, and the political order that gave it meaning. What does it mean that the object survives when everything that produced it has dissolved? That may be the real question Queen Mary's life poses, and it is not one she would have framed in those terms. She was a practical woman who lived through an extraordinary compression of historical change, the end of empire, the dissolution of European royal houses, 2 world wars and abdication, the disappearance of the Romanovs. She responded to all of it by making things, reconfiguring things, turning the complicated and the painful into the functional and the permanent, then pressing them forward into hands she would never know. Her losses were real and relentless. What she built from them was also real. The tiaras moving through royal collections today, worn by women, not yet born when Mary died, adjusted by hands she never touched, are in some sense the autobiography she left. Not words, not a memoir. Objects that carry her decisions in their settings and her grief in their provenance. Diamonds are archives. They do not decay. They hold within their structure the specific pressure that formed them, unchanged by everything that has happened since. Mary spent a lifetime pressing her own pressure into the stones around her. And now in rooms she never entered, at events she could not have imagined, what she made continues to catch the light, altered, yes, repurposed, yes, worn by strangers, but recognizably hers. A survival not in memory but in matter. The most permanent kind there is.